Okay, everyone. Thank you for checking in and attending the meeting. Calling the meeting to order. Julie, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Dance. Mr. Dance,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Goodman, or Miss Goodman,
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom. Mark? You're muted.
There goes the plane.
There we go.
Say yes.
All right, yes.
All right. All right, everybody's here.
Okay, thank you. Next item is the agenda. I hope everyone has gotten a copy of the agenda and has had a chance to review it. And if it looks okay, we'll go ahead and approve it as presented. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented, or do I hear some comments about some changes?
I'll move to accept the agenda as presented.
I'll second it. Julie, roll call, please.
That was Mr. Peterson that approved it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Dance,
Yes.
Miss Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
moving on. Julie, did you want to say something there?
No, I just said it's all set.
Okay, okay. Moving on, we don't have any public, so we have no public comment, and we'll go from there. Next item on the agenda is approval of September 21st meeting minutes. I hope everybody's gotten a copy of it, had a chance to review it. I've reviewed it myself. I've seen nothing in there that per the memory and so on needs to be switched or added or subtracted. So any comments?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, do I hear a second to that?
Second.
Okay,
Who seconded it?
Phil did.
Okay.
Roll call, Julie?
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Dance,
Yes.
and Miss Goodman.
Yes.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. We have in front of me, I have the September 2020 accounts payable report. I'm assuming everybody has gotten that, had a chance to review it. Now, I will entertain any questions, if we have any questions, and go from there. Questions or comments? If not, could I have a motion to approve as presented?
I'll make that motion, Karen.
Okay,
I'll
thank you,
support.
Karen.
Mark.
Okay. Julie, could we have a roll call, please, on the September 2020 accounts payable?
Sure. Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Miss Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Dance,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili.
Yes.
Okay, the next item is the September 2020 financial statement, revenue and expenses and trial balance report sheet, and also included our fuel sales for September and also a running PFC general ledger cash account. I've had a
Well,
chance to review it. Go ahead.
On that PFC cash account, can you put up the on the screen the trial balance? So I'm not going to do a PFC running account anymore. The PFC account there is 73,803.58. I've gone back 3 years and audited that account. So that Excel worksheet is basically how I came up with that number. So this number will be audited every quarter. It hadn't been looked at in the last 3 years. So I do a PFC quarterly account that I send out. So I will be looking at that and making any adjustments. Basically, it's when we pay for these expenses, it comes out of the general fund. And so then that should be looked at every quarter. And then basically that money should then come out of that PFC cash account because it's in a separate bank account and reimburse back into the general fund. So going forward, as of September 30th, that is your PFC cash account that going forward.
So you will be generating one of these every quarter then?
Yep, it'll always be in that trial balance, and that will be the audited number that will be in that trial balance.
Okay.
So how I came up with that, I ran the PFC expense account. And so that's what all the detail is and on that one report. That says Manistee County or Blackbird Airport. Yep. So those are all the expenses that came through here. But as you can see, some of the some of that was reimbursed back to us. So I didn't take the full $125,000. So if you look at the bottom, it's just the 48,168.33 that were actually true expenses. Because like the E1 for 21,106, that was actually a reimbursement cost that came back to us, and that money went back into the general fund. So I didn't want to take it out of this account because it's already been put into the general fund.
Okay.
So that's your true balance that's in that PFC account is the 73,803.58 as of September 30th.
And Susan, I just want to say thank you for really tackling this and kind of, I think, getting us caught up. I think this has been neglected for a little too long, and I really appreciate all the work you've done to kind of.
Well, there was a couple pet peeves with the auditors when they were here. This was one of them, was the PFC cash account, because it hadn't been looked at or audited. Nobody knew exactly how much was truly there and what was there and what made it up. And the other one was that negative cash balance in the general fund, because it was like $113,000. So this will clean some of that up and they'll be happy with that. So that'll take care of part of that issue too.
Well, that's good.
So
That's good.
mhm.
Again, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Did
Any other
anybody
questions?
Yeah. Did
Comments?
anybody have any other questions?
If not, we'll go forward. Julie, did we have a motion and approve that financial statement? I believe we did, didn't we?
No, we did not.
Oh, okay. I know there was a motion to approve it and a
I only
second.
have,
We had a motion for the accounts payable, but not. for the
yeah.
payments.
Oh, okay. So would somebody please provide a motion for the September 2020 financial statement, revenue, expenses, et cetera, and so on?
I'll make that motion, Mark Bergstrom.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Phil has seconded. Julie, did you get that?
I did, yep.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Dance,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
and Mr. Haw.
Yes. Okay, moving on to committee reports and discussion. To my knowledge, there was no executive committee meeting during the last month. No budget committee meeting, nor any capital projects committee meeting. So based on that, Barry, you've got the floor. Barry, did you catch that?
Yes, I'm just finishing
Okay,
on the screen.
okay, go ahead.
And- So starting off with some of the easy stuff. No accidents or incidents for the month. And last month in that category, I had mentioned that there was about I don't know, 50 to 75 feet of fence that was damaged. Late last week, Straight Fence, local company was here and repaired that. So that has been taken care of before winter. So we don't run the risk of deer entering into the airport property.
So Barry, what kind of cost was that?
My recollection on the estimate on that was $1,400, I think.
Okay, okay,
Not cheap, but not outrageous either.
right, right. Just an idea as to what we got coming down the road.
With regards to EAS eligibility, since I've been mentioning this on a regular basis, I just wanted to give an update. And I'll basically just really talk about the third point there. Barring another shutdown of the economy in the remaining 2.5 months of the year, with Cape Air's service and how well they're being received, this should not all be an issue for us this year. We could easily surpass the required 2,800 passengers. Again, short of a shutdown of the economy in the next few weeks, that should not be a problem. So I just wanted to give that update. And obviously, we'll talk more about how Cape Air is being received shortly.
Barry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Your sound's kind of uneven.
Okay. Yes, I just
Little louder, just a little louder, I think.
have to speak up then.
No, Barry, I think there's background noise, maybe
Right,
from the boardroom there,
Okay.
and then it drowns you out.
Okay, so maybe they need to mute while I'm talking. So Jerry, do you see how to mute?
is that the red button there?
Yes. So did that help? Am I clearer now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Jerry, remember that if you want us to hear you again, to unpress that button. Flip this around. So I guess my next slide is actually just kind of our last report on public charters, North Country Sky. So in September, we had a total of 344 passengers, which was actually a slight increase from September of last year. So, we actually had a fairly good September. However, putting that in context, last year in September, the airport was closed for 10 days because of what was anticipated to be our runway resurfacing project. So it not stellar, but we started seeing some improvement in September. October is going to actually be, significantly better than that. And then last on their performance, North Country Sky Public Charters did end on a good note. There was not a single delayed flight or single canceled flight in the month of September. So at least, as they wound down service, they did not cut the quality of the service. They actually did deliver until the last day. So I'm thankful and happy of that.
That's good to hear.
This next slide is my airfare report for the month. And it's honestly the best report, I think, it might be the best report I've ever had to share with the board. Maybe I might have had one or two during the Frontier days that, were equally good, but airfares right now lend themselves to being very beneficial to our market. So on the top half of the screen here, those that are bold are the destinations out of Manistee that have the lowest airfare right now versus Traverse City, Grand Rapids, or Muskegon. And you'll see that other than a handful, we are less expensive than Grand Rapids. We are certainly more expensive than both Muskegon and Traverse City right now. And on average, our fares out of here are about just shy of $25 less expensive than Grand Rapids. Again, never, or unless, a couple months during Frontier years, has that ever been the case. So I hope that this continues. I'm sure some of this is pandemic related. The entire airline industry has some weird pricing going on as they're trying to rebuild and attract passengers back to flying. But those fares out of Chicago that then pair up with very low fares from Manistee to Chicago right now are working very well for us. And then if you add in the cost of parking on top of that, I mean, we're nearly $100 less expensive than Grand Rapids for a flight and a week's worth of parking. It's really amazing, and I think the word of this is just starting to get out there. It's not actually a message that we've been pushing on our marketing yet, because we weren't sure if this was real, if it was kind of temporary, but we're now seeing it's only 2 weeks in, so it's not a big window. But if this continues, this will take on a more and more significant role in our marketing. But whether we're marketing it or not, people are discovering it. Any questions on airfares? With none there, I'll move on to the other parts of my report. So I do not have an update on the fuel system monitor. We're limping along with what we have there. I do, after not having this on the my report for a few months, do have a Coho Bend Billboard update. So sometime in the last month, there's a farm market a fairly new farm market that exists on River Road that has put up a banner, and they've attached it to this billboard without seeking our approval. I was in another meeting with George Saylor, and I mentioned this to him, and he's claiming that he's going to use this as a reason to reopen the whole conversation on that billboard with Tom St. Dennis, who owns Coho Bend and is responsible for that billboard. So we'll wait to see when and if that happens, but I did reach out again on this topic, trying to get it finally to come to some conclusion. Any questions on either of those items? Okay, then moving on to the,
Barry, just a comment on that. Tom did sell Coho Bend. Barry.
Jeff, we can't hear you very well.
Hello, Barry.
up there.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep. Could you repeat what you said? I heard sold.
Hello, Barry.
Can you hear me? We can now hear you.
Yes.
Okay. You're gonna have to.
I'm gonna switch over to Wi-Fi. Okay, there you go. I just want to comment that Tom St. Dennis.
Hey, Jeff, I think you need to switch over to Wi-Fi.
There, I'm on regular Wi-Fi now.
Much better.
Okay, so Tom St. Dennis sold that on a land contract. So I don't know what the legality in regard to that is, but he does not own Coho Bend, so to speak. He did sell that last year.
Okay. The last we had heard was that that had fallen through, but maybe it's unfell through. So that's good to know. But I guess that's why I got George on it to figure out the implications. Thank you for that update though, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to the former Aaron's hangar, now airport owned hangar. So when I last updated the board last month on this, the plan was for Cape Air to house both their regular aircraft, the Technim, as well as their backup spare Cessna 402 airplanes in that hangar over the course of the winter. When they started operations and actually got the aircraft here, it became clear that both airplanes would not fit. So they are now only housing the Technim in that hangar, and they're leasing a second hangar from Orchard Beach to house the 402. So a little bit change, a little bit more costly for them to have to lease two hangars, but we don't have a lot of hangars here, so that's ultimately what the only hangars that would work for them.
Barry, are they different sizes, the two planes?
Yes.
Okay.
402, the older aircraft, is smaller and it fits in either hangar, but the Technim will only fit in the former Aaron's hangar.
When would they
Sure.
use it? When they overflow or something, or what?
They use the hangars every day.
Oh, they do?
Yes, their operational model is to have the equipment undercover every night to reduce their de-icing costs from having it sit out in the elements overnight.
Okay, thanks.
It was an example of that. If the planes had been out last night, they would have required de-icing this morning, but because they were indoors, there was no frost buildup on them, and therefore they could save that cost. So ultimately, they view that they save money by reducing de-icing costs versus the cost of the hangars.
Do they expect they'll be able to take passengers in both airplanes in, or is one just a backup?
One is just a backup.
Okay,
I'll touch a little bit more on some of these aspects throughout my report where they kind of fit in.
okay.
Last month I had mentioned that I had found a company called Powerlift Doors who came recommended from the Frankfurt airport, and they were out here a few days before Cape Air started service. So it was that week. So I don't know if it was Monday or Tuesday of that week, with Cape Air starting service on Thursday. And they did a full inspection and maintenance on the hangar door. Basically, it's good to go. And Cape Air started using it on October 1st. Interestingly enough, though, on the evening of September 30th, when we actually had the Technim here for the first time, when they went to go put the plane in the hangar, it didn't fit. The door was about 3 inches too short. So Powerlift doors came out again on October 1st, adjusted the door heights. There's door stops, so there's a little bit of play as to how high a door can go. Basically adjusted it about a foot higher, so now the Technim fits in there without any issues. So
Great.
October 1st on, Cape Air has had use of that hangar. We do still have some additional maintenance to do on the hangar. So last month I had mentioned that there are really two pieces to what Powerlift was planning on doing. One was just kind of this overall door maintenance, which includes checking the motor, changing oil in the motor, greasing all of the zerks and everything that's moving parts, checking the cables, and kind of doing an overall inspection. And then the second is at the top of the door, there's basically a seal that basically is to close off the space between the door and the structure of the building. And that seal is completely deteriorated such that there's about a 4-inch gap there, which has been used by our local pigeon population as access into the hangar. That's something that has to get addressed. I have a quote for doing that work from Powerlift, but unfortunately the quote fell outside my spending authority. So I basically am coming to you today to approve that work. The quote for that work from Powerlift to basically replace that seal, and to do that work, they basically have to take the siding of the building off because they're basically tucking a rubber-like material in behind the siding so that water basically sheds off as opposed to in the structure. Plus lift rental, plus 2 people for an entire full day, plus, I might have mentioned lift rental, plus travel. The total for that quote is $3,526.75. My spending authority is $3,000, so it was just slightly over. So I would request that the board authorize me to go ahead and to get that work done so that hangar that we now own is essentially weather tight for the winter.
Barry, we have about $73,000 available, don't we? Or not?
Whether this ultimately comes out of our repairs line item or we take it out of PFC, I would let Susan and I kind of figure that out once we get really looking into the budget. I don't have a recommendation right now as to which specific line item on the budget it should come out of, but it would certainly fit in the category of repairs, but we may decide to not take it out of there for right now.
Well, I'll make a motion to repair that seal. And then we'll just have to figure out what kind of funds, where the funds are going to come from. But apparently that should happen. It's essential, isn't it? I think pretty much.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah. So I'll make that motion to make that improvement.
I'll second.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Barry, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, yep, thank you, Mark. Do
You're
I hear a
welcome.
second on that?
I'll second that. Barry,
Okay, Bill seconded, and also Barry, I think, seconded, right?
correct.
Julie, could we have a roll call, please?
Sure. I just want to verify the amount. It was $3,526.75.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Roll call. Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Ha,
Yes.
Mr. Dunce.
Yes.
Okay, before we leave this topic here, Barry, the overall inspection, what was the cost on that, or is it included in the $3,500?
It is not.
Okay,
We really needed that to happen before Cape Air took use of it.
right.
So
No problem with that.
I asked them to create two quotes, one that fit within my spending authority, and then this one, which was above. So it was
Right.
it was around $1,000 for the maintenance and inspections.
Okay, that was my only question, just curiosity. Thank you.
Now, there's one other thing, for some reason around here, nothing seems to go smoothly.
Yeah.
On October 1st, the first night that Cape Air used the hangar to house their aircraft, while we were doing all sorts of training on every aspect, no one thought to train the pilots and crew who was actually going to house the plane in the hangar how to properly operate the doors. So that night, Cape Air personnel failed to properly release the door latches before attempting to open the door and essentially broke the door. Not severely, but there was more than minor damage, but so my personnel, we were able to get the door functioning that morning of basically the 2nd. And I had a conference call with Powerlift Doors to confirm that, given what we had done, that there were no integrity issues with the door and that it was safe to operate, and they confirmed that. So we've been using it since then. But a remaining item that is still to be done, and this is not included in the estimate above that you just approved, is there's a side track that has popped off and that needs to be reattached. And I'm planning on having Powerlift do that work when they are here to replace the door seal. But since the damage was done by Cape Air employees, they are going to cover the costs of those repairs. So the overall work will be more expensive than the $3,500, but since they're already mobilized in here and Cape Air is picking it up, I didn't reach out to them to get a separate quote to kind of quote the whole thing. So the quote you just approved is for the parts of the parts of what the work is going to be that the airport will be responsible for. But I just wanted to let you know that there is going to be some additional work that Cape Air is picking up.
So they're reimbursing all of it?
They're not reimbursing all of it, just the components that were resulted from the damage that they did.
Okay.
So that makes sense. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear. Okay.
Yep, we're all clear, Barry, that was good.
So we're talking
In
about
fact-
money. Let's talk about bringing some money in. So on futures of the hangar, and I actually missed putting on here probably the most important bullet item. Although it is, I think, under new business. Yeah, that's probably why I didn't put it here, but I'll probably mention it here. So we are continuing, I'm having continual conversations with Cadillac Aircraft Service, who is interested in long-term use of that hangar, and also with Cape Air, and trying to figure out if there's a possibility of jointly using it. Again, our goal here is to attract a business to base their operations here at the airport, which will be a good thing for long-term port development. So we're continuing those conversations. The timeline that we've just talked about is to work basically through the fall and winter now and to have a proposal ready for the board in the March timeframe. And that then ties into the other piece of this is Cape Air and myself, we've agreed to a lease rate of that hangar for the winter of $1,000 a month, which was a number that I had presented to the board in the past in discussing potential revenue on that. So I'm basically looking for a consensus from the board that that is a reasonable lease rate, and I will then finalize the paperwork on that. Generally, hangar leases have always been something that has been in my area of responsibility, and the board hasn't done typical leases. But I kind of, since this is a little bit outside the norm, I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware before I executed a lease with Cape Air for $1,000 a month for that hangar. And my plans right now are to lease it to them through April at that rate. And that may be extended or not, depending on these longer term negotiations and plans. So we will have $7,000 of revenue coming in from Cape Air for that hangar to help offset these costs that we're incurring to get it into operable shape.
Good.
Feedback.
Barry, that April is of 2021?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so it'll be running from this October until April 2021, right?
7 months. And again, if we come up with an agreement with Cadillac Aircraft Service, that agreement could then start coming May 1.
Okay. Now,
Barry-
go ahead.
I'm just gonna, Barry, are we leasing the space to them too, Cadillac Aircraft Service, or?
No, their needs would not have been met in the timeline that these things came together for this year. So they're looking really now at something starting next year and into next winter.
Okay.
Now, Barry, question, this lease we're talking about for the hangar is different than the lease we got that was passed out in the agenda Appendix A, right?
Yes, that is,
Okay.
there's overall terminal lease, fee structure, and kind
Okay,
of,
so they're,
that's the
okay.
master kind of agreement that we have with an airline. This is just a separate agreement that's just their lease of that terminal or that hangar for that period of time.
Okay, I'm gonna say as chair of the board, unless there's some other comments, I have no problem myself with Barry going forward with this type lease for the hangar with Cape Air. Any comments? Negatives? Yes?
I think it's a good thing, Mark.
Okay. So Barry, go forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Moving on to capital project updates, and going through your agenda and board packet, there's a lot of documents to be approved this month, kind of tying into all of these. I'm first going to start with the Airport ALP update. So the board approved that last month. And at that time, we hadn't yet received the formal grant paperwork on that. And quite honestly, I think the state forgot about it because we got it actually last Wednesday. And that was after myself and Prina Newhoff on Tuesday had a conversation about this and asked the state, where is the grant paperwork? And then magically it shows up the next day. So I got that last week. I then needed a document from our recording secretary it's a piece of paperwork that goes in with this that I got from Julie on Friday. So I haven't yet submitted this, but after this meeting, it's on my plan to get done today is to get all of that submitted that the board approved last month. Pfos testing. Back at our special meeting in September, where we were basically needing to meet the timelines of MDOT to get their end of year things done. We approved the grant agreement for that. And I should just mention that, and this may help as we walk through all of these different documents under new business, is the grant agreements are between us and the state is actually acting on behalf of the FAA, since Michigan is a block grant state. And those grant agreements are basically our funding for projects. Then we also have a document or multiple documents that are actually the contracts to do the work, or kind of the expense piece of any project. So on the PFAS side, we approved the grant agreement, which is essentially our funding for the project. And in the packet this month is the contract with Prina Newhoff to actually do the work. Now, those kind of go hand in hand, and much of the contract was incorporated into the grant agreement as appendices. So, but again, they are two separate agreements. One is between us and the state. One is between us and the contractor, Prina Newhoff in this case. And then as it relates to the runway resurfacing, which is a project that has, been completed since June, as they go through the final accounting and kind of wrapping up of projects, there's a change order that's kind of come in that's kind of hopefully the final. I put final in quotes because it always seems that I think they told us the last change order was the final. There's actually a series of documents, some between the contract between us and Reith Riley, and also the contract between us and the consultant, and then how all of those come under the grant agreement for funding. So there's, I think, 3 different documents that all relate to kind of wrapping this up. The net, though, actually is that the contract with Reith Riley, that amendment is actually a negative amendment. So as they've gone through and adjusted for final quantities, that amount is actually coming down, I think, by about $13,000. But then a couple of the other pieces that are being approved are to the opposite direction because those just hadn't worked their way through the process yet. So lots of documents for approval later under new business, but they all fall into support of these 3 capital improvement projects. Any questions on that? Or if not, you'll have opportunity later when we go through each one individually to approve. I'll move on. Since normally we are talking in an October meeting about air service in September, I do have a slide here that talks to how North Country Sky touched on some of this, earlier in the overall passenger report. But, in general, North Country Sky ended with good performance, no cancellation, no delays. Our numbers for September were significantly better than they have been, and significantly ahead of nationwide numbers. Of course, there is that caveat that the airport was closed last year for a bit. And this is something that I just noticed this morning, and I just wanted to mention because in some ways it's a big day in aviation. Yesterday was the first day this country has had more than 1 million commercial passengers fly since March 16th. We've been hovering kind of at our peaks around 950,000 for about a month now, 900 to close to that million. But yesterday was the first day we were over a million. So, and that percentage equates to just shy of 40% of year ago numbers. And through the summer, we've been more in a 33 to 35%. So there's gradual improvement going on. And hopefully we can maintain that as a nation as the economy continues to restart. And that actually makes a good segue into Cape Air service. So overall, Cape Air is exceeding expectations, both ours and theirs. For the month of October, I'm predicting that we will nearly match our July for total passengers. And in a normal July versus October, July would probably be 2 to 3 times October. So far in the first 18 days of service, they've had about 30% of their flights sold out. I do have an asterisk there, and that'll come up in a couple slides to explain why that's there. But we're basically operating many flights that are full. Last week was our best week of ticket sales for this entire year. The previous best was the week before 4th of July. Again, kind of heading into that summer peak travel time. Ticket sales overall are near what they were a year ago for this month. And last month, October, was actually a relatively good month for us. It was probably our best month of the year from an overall performance, not necessarily best month in total passengers, because summer always dominates. But we had very stable service in October. We had 30-seat aircraft every day, and we didn't have many cancellations or any operational issues. So last year, October was actually a very good month for us. And we're actually doing really good in comparison to that good month last year, even though nationwide, we're still in that 35, maybe to 40% range of passenger numbers. We're far exceeding that.
So Cape Air was a good choice.
Cape Air, I would say, was a good choice, being very well received. And from now on, I was thinking about this morning as I was putting this together. October is really the first month of their 24-month contract for Cape Air. I think it's very safe to say, barring, unforeseen events, that for the next 23 months of their contract, so basically the remaining months, except for the first, they're going to surpass year-over-year numbers. The numbers from now on are really easy to beat because North Country Sky had such operational performance issues really starting November last year, and then through winter, and then COVID hit, and that has depressed things since then, is that I think, we're going to see 23 months in a row of beats of previous year numbers starting next month. So overall, everything is really looking good. The United American partnerships that Cape Air has, I think, are beginning to change the perception of Manistee's air service. We've not really hit that hard in marketing. We did our last newsletter that went out to our email distribution list, went out on Friday, and that was really the first time where we really pushed that message. It's been there, but more in a subdued manner. We're starting to push it more because what we're seeing is as people interact with our website, they're just searching fares Manistee to Chicago or Chicago to Manistee because that's what the only thing they've been able to do for the last 8 years. Even though now they can do a Manistee to Los Angeles fare and basically search that right on our website. because they've never been able to do that before, they're just doing what they've always done. And slowly we're trying to educate, train people that there's so much more now available. And with those airfares that I had mentioned earlier, not only is there more available, it's going to cost you less right now than any other airport option in the area. So we're starting to kind of see that in, I'm starting to see it with the passengers that come through here of how many are flying on United or American. And just before this meeting started, well, actually, I'll hold off on that because it ties into a bullet point I have later on. So, but I've got a story to add that occurred like 11 o'clock today on the flight that came in. We're beginning to see more interest from Traverse City area customers. So again, we're tracking based on our website, where people are coming from. And when we launched our new website, the majority, I shouldn't say majority, the largest number of people interacting with our website were from the greater Chicago area. And, that again makes sense because that's who has been flying us. We've, excelled in that kind of Manistee to Chicago market. So there was, that continued interest. And then Traverse City area and Manistee area were kind of neck and neck for number 2 and 3 in that. But over really the last 10 days, that's starting to switch and it's now being dominated by Traverse City area people looking at Manistee now as a place to fly out of. Already kind of talked about the fares earlier. I'm saying some of this is likely due to pandemic pricing by the major carriers, but it's going to be very interesting to continue to watch this going forward, is to see, is this a blip? Is this something that we, can expect to continue? Or will, just where normal will end up on this. And then the last point here is, I actually find this really interesting, is for the first time ever that I've been tracking fares, United, American, and Delta have matched out of Traverse City and Grand Rapids the fares that Cape Air is charging to Chicago. Normally what's a $250 round trip ticket out of Traverse City at the lowest, they've been doing $98 tickets. And the dates for that have corresponded to the introduction of Cape Air service. So those tickets became available on September, I think 29th. So like 2 days before Cape Air started. But they all expire on later this week. So I'm anticipating that it was just kind of a temporary thing, match fares, but that they're going to go back to their typical fare structures in Grand Rapids and Traverse City for travel to Chicago. But it was interesting that we actually caused enough of a blip that they actually did a match of fares out of here.
It creates more exposure.
Yes, yep. And, they kind of want, while there was kind of that initial, even though we did a soft launch, we didn't have a big marketing push for start of service. There was some buzz on social media about what was going on. And I think majors just wanted to counteract that. And it's like, oh no, it's the same price to fly out of Traverse City or Grand Rapids too. You can ignore Manistee. That may work for a couple weeks, but if they return their fares to normal levels over time, will be such a better bargain, especially if you're going to Chicago, let alone what happens when you connect beyond that. That I'm anticipating some very good things coming this next year. Now, that all of that has been very rosy news. That doesn't mean that there aren't some growing pains and operational issues. So, for example, this weekend, Saturday, we had our first canceled flights on Cape Air. And Officially, it was because of the winds, more so the projected winds. The winds never got quite as bad here as the forecasts were projecting on Saturday afternoon. But behind the scenes, there were actually some operational issues with the aircraft, mechanical issues that actually the Cessna 402, which flew in the morning, which is our backup aircraft, on its flight up that day, its second radio basically became non-operational, which then limited its ability to operate the rest of the day. And the Technim, which was supposed to fly back in to pick up the route, basically decided because of the forecasted weather conditions not to come up. So we didn't have an aircraft here that could fly. We started service with the Technim. We're the first Cape Air city that has started service with the Technim. It operates in other cities, but from day one, we were a Technim city. But in the first 18 days, about half of our flights have been operated with the 402. Our Technim had a mechanical issue in Chicago a week ago Sunday, and we only got a Technim back this yesterday. So that entire last week was operated with the 402. And while they both do the job, the Technim is a much nicer aircraft from a customer experience perspective than the 402. So I've been disappointed the fact that we haven't had the Technim operate more frequently here. Certainly glad we've got a backup airplane, and we're not, other than Saturday, having passengers displaced. But you only get one time to make a first impression, and I really want that Technim to shine, especially as we're transitioning from a jet aircraft and the expectations around moving from a 30-seat jet to a 9-seat twin prop plane. I just really want that customer experience to be the best it can, and we haven't had that so far. Obviously, I'm going to keep an eye on that and complain when appropriate. I've started raising some questions on that already. Earlier, I had said that 30% of our flights have been sold out. One would think that you've got a 9-seat aircraft. If you're sold out, that means you're selling 9 seats. Well, currently, our route is being limited to 7 passengers per flight. There are 2 reasons for this. One is a temporary weight restriction that's placed on the Technim that I was told at the end of September would be addressed in a couple of weeks. Now I'm being told it's probably another month. Just the snail's pace of the FAA approval. It's basically a software upgrade to their computer system, which I don't know what it changes, but with that software upgrade, it allows them to basically carry another 200 passengers or 200 pounds of weight, which is essentially equivalent to an additional passenger. The other issue is, and this is enlightening in a lot of ways, is the operating envelope of either the Cessna 402 or the Technim, as far as weight goes. When you fill that plane up with maximum number of passengers and a maximum number of bags, and then fuel, and then if weather conditions require, you may have to carry extra fuel to reach alternate airports per how the FAA requires airlines to operate. You're always on days you have a full number of passengers, you're always going to be close to max weight on the aircraft. Now, when this is not something that only happens, to us, but when you've got a 30-seat plane, and we were rarely ever coming close to operating, filling it with 30 seats, we had all the room in the world to spare when it came to weight and balance issues is what they're called. With the Tecnam selling out, we're pretty much every flight doing those calculations. And Cape Air's process is that, well, I'll step back a little bit. It's really more of an FAA thing. So with a 9-seat aircraft of the capabilities of the Tecnam, that qualifies to be operated with a single pilot. Cape Air normally flies with a pilot and co-pilot, but technically the aircraft can be operated single pilot. If they get to a weight and balance issue with a full aircraft and they are over, Cape Air's internal policy is that they will first bump the first officer before they inconvenience a passenger, which is just an interesting thing to think about. Operating completely within FAA guidance, et cetera. And in many routes where Cape Air operates that are not EAS routes, they routinely operate single pilot. So it's in their EAS routes where they normally operate with 2 crew. So it's well within their operating experience to operate single pilot. And in fact, our first couple flights, our inaugural flight, did only have a single pilot operating. But for those pilots to be certified to operate the aircraft by themselves, they need a minimum of 100 hours operating this specific model. And because the Tecnam is new, not all crews have that minimum amount of time. So therefore they are limiting passenger bookings by 1 person. So the 2 of those issues gets you from 9 to 7 max. I've raised this issue with basically the department heads within Cape Air, saying that I want at least one of these issues, if not both of them, addressed before basically the end of year holidays, which is kind of the next window where I'm anticipating that we will have a large number of flights sold out. Because essentially, going from 9 to 7, you're cutting your capacity by 20%. And the whole point of operating service is to meet the needs. And if we're selling out flights, we want to be meeting the needs by getting as many people to their destination and flying out of our airport as possible. So long-winded explanation on that, but it's kind of hard to talk about some of those details without going into a little bit more of the details.
Barry, is it possible to increase the number of flights?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but unlikely because of how Cape Air crews and duty days with their crews. So realistically right now, a crew and an aircraft can basically operate our route twice a day. To go more than that, they need another crew and another aircraft, which is why their seasonal versus non-seasonal bid for our service was 2 in the winter and 4 in the summer. So in the summer, we'll have 2 aircraft based here. In the winter, we have 1. In the summer, we'll have 2 crews each day. In the winter, we have 1. So it's like there's this multiple of 2 that fits their operating model to keep their costs in line. And we're not at the point of needing 4 flights a day in the off season yet. Then the other part of that is those additional flights would need to operate unsubsidized because the EAS subsidy only covers X number of flights per day per the agreement that was proposed. So
Okay, thank
no,
you.
these are all things that will come into play 2 years from now when we rebid EAS and try to match our hopefully significantly improved demand to capacity.
Barry, as a point of information for you, we have a family member that comes in a couple times a year who has been going into Traverse City and not here for quite a while, who came in on Cape Air for the first time and commented on the 402 as opposed to the Tecnam, which is what they thought they were going to be flying. So push that with them and get it going again.
I already am. So, and it's interesting. So the result of my email that I sent last week to basically raise this question, I got a response basically end of day Friday. It was really more of a we're working on it response, not a resolution response, but the content of that, and that came from Andrew Bonney, who basically is VP of basically air service development. And he said that my questions had raised a bunch of other questions in their internal discussions. And it's kind of a bigger thing that they're trying to figure out how to address. Because quite honestly, we're not quite the perfect fit for them, because while they operate into O'Hare is not a base of theirs. St. Louis is their base. So from a maintenance standpoint, we're like 2 hops away. And that, I think they thought, well, if they just based an extra aircraft here, that would address that. But what they're discovering is that obviously is a key component of that. But then you have to figure out how to get crews and airplanes back and forth. And that's what they've been struggling with is, okay, the plane's fixed, but now how do we get it back up to Manistee? And then once those people get there, how do they get back? Especially since we've got full flights, they just can't necessarily jump on the next flight back and fly Cape Air back. So they're thinking about their model as they had thought it would work, and now kind of in service what they're seeing. And that's the previous slide I mentioned, growing pains. If we were only putting on, 2 or 3 passengers a flight, because that's kind of what I was kind of anticipating back in, July, when we were kind of originally talking with them about initial schedule, just because of pandemic and just overall demand. A lot of these things would not be issues, but because we're operating basically at capacity every day, they're learning a lot in the first few weeks here. Any other comments or questions? Okay, having said all that, this slide kind of touches on a couple things that I would just kind of wanted to bring up that have kind of come up as a result of observing Cape Air now the first couple weeks. So the first thing I'll say is their customer service is very impressive. And, this weekend, I think, was an example showing that when they had their first canceled flights. Unlike previous carriers, their partnerships with American and United basically create so many additional options. So, for example, the passengers that were scheduled to go out of here Saturday night ended up getting rebooked on American or United out of Traverse City. And basically, even though we wouldn't have been able to handle them because the next day flights both were sold out until like 48 hours later, they were able to still get to their destinations same day because Cape Air can rebook on United and American. Now, going back to my observation of something that happened this morning at 11 o'clock. So we had a passenger come in here this morning who basically got booked at the last minute, and he was an American passenger that they couldn't get him to New York. Apparently he flew out of Traverse City this morning. They could not get him to New York today. So they put him, American put him on Cape Air's flight to Manistee to get him back to Traverse City while, he figures out what he's going to do. Now, the problem that comes in is really kind of getting into the next bullet point here, is American just assumed that there would be ground transportation that would be able to get him from Manistee to Traverse City. That's, as we all know, not necessarily a assured thing. The Manistee cab wouldn't even answer the phone. And if they had answered the phone, I know what their answer is. Oh, that's too far. We won't go to Traverse City. The airline dug up about 4 or 5 Traverse City cab companies to try to get them to come down and pick him up. I've been busy with getting ready for this and then the tour of the Technum and then this meeting. So I don't know. I don't see him sitting here anymore. So I'm assuming he has found something. But it's very interesting that not only can Cape Air use American and United to handle our issues here operationally, but American and United will use Cape Air to handle their issues out of Traverse City or other airports as well. A whole different ball game from our previous service. So one of my points here is Cape Air has a lot more tools available to help a passenger when something goes wrong. And while it's never a good experience when your flight is canceled, it's a lot better than we've been able to give our customers, for the last nearly decade. Now, I had already put in my report the second bullet point, which kind of talks about the local transportation needs, because Cape Air themselves have been struggling with local transportation availability. They've needed local transportation just to shuttle their employees around, especially as they, at the start of service when they had a good number of people here, and have found local transportation providers either unavailable, unwilling, or rude at providing transportation. And they're also trying to find someone locally who will basically transport misconnected baggage. So if a bag misconnects and doesn't make it on the flight, so the bag comes in here next flight or next day, that bag needs to get delivered to the passenger. There's no one locally that's at all embracing doing that as a business. So they're struggling trying to fit regular airline models into the Manistee market. These are all great problems to have, but they're problems nonetheless. Any comments on any of those points?
Hey, Barry, I have a question.
Sure.
The rental car, when I had work done once at Link's Body Shop, I don't know which company it is, but it was a national company in Cadillac. They actually drove over a rental car to me at Link's Body Shop. And I think Link's arranged it, but I don't know if that's something that they do normally.
That's actually my next slide.
Oh, okay.
That national company is Hertz. Hertz has agreements with Lynx and I believe Gerber in town, and provides a couple of rental cars to those body shops. They've not been receptive of working directly here at the airport in the past. I was planning on reaching out to them this year, knowing that we were going to get new service. And then the pandemic hit and Kurtz went into bankruptcy protection, and it was just not a good time to be exploring those options. However, Cape Air, through their contacts, arranged a meeting last week between myself, Cape Air, and then the Michigan regional manager for Hertz. So basically he's responsible for all of Michigan. And that was actually a very good call. I kind of laid out kind of our situation and kind of demand. They laid out kind of different business models they have, from a full Hertz kind of owned and operated and manned facility down to a kind of joint partnership, which is something like Lynx would be doing, and just kind of what revenue thresholds kind of make sense for each one of those. We don't have nearly enough revenue to justify a fully manned and staffed Hertz operation yet, I'll say. But we certainly fit into some of their other categories. So there's a follow-up call this week with them. They were going to do some internal digging, and part of what they were going to do is just see because the person I was talking with, being head of all of Michigan, he wasn't aware of the actual agreements in place with Lynx and even who that was handled out of. I believe it's handled out of the Traverse City office of Hertz. But he was going to basically do more internal digging just to find out what presence they already have in the area and what has happened to this point in time. They were asking for me a little more visibility into the demand side of things that I need to pull together for that meeting with them. But I mean, I think things are, optimistically going in a good direction. I asked him as to how the bankruptcy proceeding impacts new business development, and his answer was it shouldn't, but sometimes it could. And then the first point here, which I kind of jumped over, is also coming into play here, is since our last meeting, I have gotten information directly from one and indirectly from the other that both of the other businesses in Manistee that were offering car rentals, Victorian Carport and Parkdale Auto, have now formally stopped and don't intend to do car rentals going forward. And both of them have cited recent state auto insurance law changes. So you may be aware, the whole no-fault insurance that Michigan had, that's all been changed. And apparently it's been changed in ways that are not attractive to car rentals, because both operators cited that as the escalating costs around auto insurance as preventing them from continuing service. So between Parkdale Auto, which this year they didn't provide car rental service at all during the summer for COVID reasons initially, and now I think that's becoming permanent because of the insurance changes. But a year ago, they were operating about 8 vehicles out of their facility. Victorian did 2 or 3, and then we had another 8 or 9 here. So overall, about 20 vehicles that were available for rent in Manistee. And as of right now, that is down to 8, and that's clearly not going to meet our demand, especially with the changes in improvements in airline service. We're going to need more vehicles, not less. So again, that's my story to Hertz. I just need to get some of those numbers down on paper for this next meeting. So there's some movement on rental car, which is better than it's been for a while in that area. Any questions on that topic? Marketing, I actually don't have a lot to say here, but just kind of quickly go through it. So Brandon Jensen and I, Right Side Design, we've basically finalized our fiscal year 2021 marketing budget that basically will be composed of $10,000 in state grant funds and $15,000 in airport budgeted funds for a total marketing budget of $25,000. Which is slightly less than we've been, but that will be complemented by Cape Air's marketing spend. And you've potentially seen or heard some of Cape Air's presence in the market. They've got the Billboard on 31 coming into town. And I know they've been doing some radio spots on WTCM, and I'm not even sure of all that they have in the market right now. I know that they have some television spots planned. I'm not sure with which operator, and I don't know when those are coming. I've actually got a meeting with them later this afternoon to kind of get caught up on there. We've not been able to meet really since the start of service just because of scheduling issues on both of our sides. We typically have done a marketing update for the board in this meeting, since this is the first meeting of the new fiscal year. It just didn't come together or make sense for this meeting. So expect to get that either next month or in December at the board meeting, kind of a full marketing update with kind of the marketing plan for the coming year, and then also how Cape Air fits into that. We switched over everything on our website to be an all Cape Air message on 9/30. So, you know, the new website went live middle of September, and it was kind of a joint. We were still, North Country Sky was there because people still, were booking that end of September, and Cape Air was kind of secondary as a coming thing. And on 9/30, basically wiped away the old, in with the new, and since then it's been Cape Air fully branded. Also on 9/30, after the last North Country Sky flight, we replaced all in-terminal branding. Signage got updated. Painting of a wall out of North Country Sky colors to Cape Air colors. It was actually a good bonding experience because that September 30th, the last day that North Country Sky was here, there were probably 15 Cape Air employees here in total, between station and training and operations and crew, IT, and Andrew Bonney came in that day and basically took everybody out to dinner that evening. And there's so many things going on, and I did not want their inaugural flight to have the wrong colors. So that afternoon, I had carved out enough time that I was able to get to War Hardware and buy the paint. And I was sitting next to Andrew Bonney at dinner and telling him, yeah, I'm going to go after dinner. I'm going to go back to the airport and paint the wall. And he said, well, can I join you? So he and I had good bonding as we painted the wall. So the VP of business development at Cape Air and your airport manager were here till midnight that night painting the wall so that our first day of service could be what it needed to be. So, but we had a really good conversation. We talked about a lot of topics that we wouldn't have been able to have the time.
Good job, Barry. Good job.
So,
Yeah.
But yeah, so everything got switched, and we really started the day. You wouldn't have known that the day before we were doing North Country Sky flights. We've got new brochures available that kind of are introductory, that describe the Cape Air service out of Manistee. And our plan is to have bi-weekly meetings with Cape Air marketing. Today is really the first day on that new schedule. First and third Mondays of the month, we'll be meeting with them. And last month I had mentioned that the plan was to have a soft opening, which in hindsight I'm very thankful for. It's just, there were so many people and so many things changing that to throw on public and media on top of that, it would not have been smart. And that's kind of their standard operation, is they soft launch, get operations running smoothly, and then they have an event later. The plan was to do that late October. Their marketing department and I had a conversation about that a week or so ago, and we decided to postpone that until early mid-November, basically after the election. They're very concerned with the public perception of a public event amongst, COVID restrictions. How will that be perceived? I told them it wouldn't be perceived negatively in our community, but they're just concerned that someone could use that in this very contested political environment. They just don't want to get caught in any sort of, oh, they had a public event and, they're endangering the public type thing. So we just decided to be safe. We'll just push it off until after the election. So we still don't have a date yet picked for that, but once I know, it'll probably be before our next meeting. I'll certainly get information out to all of you, and you will be invited to come and attend. It will still be a COVID safe environment though, so be prepared to wear your mask. Other issues, and this was talked about at the last board meeting, and I'm kind of reiterating here, although Jerry and I have talked about this in a little more detail in between meetings, and I'm thinking about other things that really should be on this list. So to refresh everyone's memory, is we have a document, officially adopted set of rules and regulations is what we call them, that basically cover all operations here at the airport, whether it be car rental, aircraft, fueling, sightseeing flights. Theoretically, it covers all business activity at the airport. In the kind of industry, this often is referred to as an airport's minimum standards. It's just kind of a different name that it goes by. And I think that conveys more of the sense of the document, is as a public use airport that receives federal funding, we are obligated through our grant assurances to provide a level playing field for anyone who wants to operate here, a business. So we can't exclude somebody, create exclusionary deals or contracts. We have to really allow anyone to operate here. But that doesn't mean that we can't set some minimum standards such that operations that occur here happen in a way that makes sense and are not counterproductive to the overall goals of the airport, thus the name minimum standards. And I brought this up last month in the context of the existing car rental agency and the lack of quality standards as it relates to their current vehicle fleet, and just ask the board to look into updating this document to maybe raise the standards on car rentals so that we're not disappointing the public when they rent a car out of Manistee and it doesn't meet their expectations for a car rental that they would get in another airport. In addition to that, the board will recognize the name Ryan Shively because we did the hangar deal with him. He has recently, in his antique Warbird, gotten FAA authority to do sightseeing operations with that airplane. We really don't have in our minimum standards any standards for sightseeing operations. And that's an area that probably should be looked at, since I know his intention is to probably next year start doing that in some format. And he's also expressed interest and is going through the process of becoming a certified flight instructor. And that would be another airport-based business that we should look at our minimum standards or rules around it and just make sure that they meet what we would expect operators to provide here. And then thinking a little bit farther down the road, if we are able to get Cadillac Aircraft Service, obviously needing to get renamed if they're going to be located at Manistee, you know, if we are successful in getting them housed here for some aspect of their business, you know, looking at what our minimum standards are around aircraft maintenance facilities and making sure that, you know, our document is in line with that. So there's actually a number of things that I think are coming or potentially coming down the pike that now is a good time for us to start evaluating this, as opposed to doing it after the fact. And then you get into more grandfathering issues and other things if you start changing the rules after someone starts operating. So I just wanted to mention that and give a little bit bigger description of it as I'm thinking through different things and how this document really comes into play for future development here at the airport. So that is the end of my presentation.
Barry, this is Jerry. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I was gonna say, I guess I'm throwing this out to everybody. Has everybody seen a copy of what Barry's talking about, the rules and regulations for the airport?
Can I forget to send that out? I think I may have.
Yeah, I think you probably did, Barry. So we probably ought to make sure everybody gets that. Let them take a look at it. And I'm thinking perhaps down the road, this is just my thought, that maybe we want to just put together an ad hoc committee of 3 people maybe, or something like that, to start pecking at this and taking a look at it and trying to piece it together without getting.
The last time the board looked at this was probably
2011, according to the rules and regulations.
I was going to say that is the process the board chose, is they assigned an ad hoc committee to work.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good. So that's my thoughts on that, and we can go from there. And also with respect, just throwing it out to the board there, with respect to auto rental service quality standards, there really isn't any in the rules and regulations referencing taxi or something like that. So we've got some groundwork to do.
But these documents are publicly available from any airport, so it's really
Yeah, well, that's right.
examples for how other airports do some of these things.
So if nobody has any objections, maybe we can start thinking about doing some kind of ad hoc committee and getting it set up for some kind of, volunteer basis to establish that for the next meeting. So I'm gonna leave it at that point right now for that. Barry, you're all set?
I am done, yes.
Okay, now what you mentioned about Brandon, yeah, that'd be good in the next month or two to have him come over and give us an update. I was writing that down on my notes as you were talking, so we're both thinking about the same thing. Okay, moving forward. We have no old business, unfinished business, but we do have a fair amount of new business. I'm going to forego item B, Cape Air hangar lease discussion, because I think we probably covered that a fair amount already.
Yes.
Barry?
Covered what
Okay.
I cover here in my presentation, in my topics.
Right, so that was good, okay. Let's go ahead and start on the Cape Air Terminal Lease Service Agreement, which was Appendix A. I presume everybody's had a chance to look at that and read it over. And one question to you, Barry, is that been, as this one that's presented here, is that a current contract, lease contract, et cetera? Is this what we had out to Cape Air and to the other folks?
So this is a combination of the public charters agreement.
Okay, that's what I meant, right.
Certain aspects of this as well as the Frontier agreement before public charters.
Okay,
It's actually more aligned with what Frontier's agreement was. But there were some changes that George had done over time. And then I kind of combined the two that made sense, ran it by George. He provided a few updates. So this is kind of the result of that process.
so this has gone through George's hands in the last several weeks then, I suspect, because,
Only a month ago, yes. Yep.
okay, so the rates and so on you've got in the contract are current rates to your satisfaction?
Yes, all of the rates are what I presented to the board back in probably February. And we're
Okay,
committed to all of the essential air service bidders so that they could incorporate our costs into their bids. These basically take rates and then incorporates them into it.
well, you kind of faded out there a little bit, Barry.
Okay, it takes those rates that the board approved back in February and incorporates them into a contract.
Okay,
And I'm doing one thing here, and this is just going back to really Cape Air as being, I think, a wonderful choice for this community, is that even though we don't even have this signed yet with Cape Air, they've already
Right.
paid their October within a week of starting service without even being invoiced. And I think Susan's shocked at that because she's used to invoicing
oh,
and then waiting around a certain amount of time to get paid, and they paid without even having an agreement in place. I mean, they're wonderful to work with.
so have they looked at this lease service agreement?
Yes.
Yeah.
and they have already signed it.
Oh, okay, okay, so it's just a matter of you signing it now, or us?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. My other questions that I had written down on reading this have somewhat been answered now, as long as George has gone through it, because I was talking about insurance. Apparently, there's enough insurance, reference paragraph 18, to satisfy you and the other folks
Correct.
involved. Right. Okay, so I guess I've got all my questions out of the way. What about the rest of the members of the board? Any questions, comments?
None, looks good to me.
Okay. So I guess we, did I hear somebody say something?
No, I think it looks good to me too, Mark.
Okay.
Jerry, I was gonna make
So-
a motion to authorize you to sign this and move this forward.
Yes, thank you. Do we have a second on that? I was just gonna ask for a motion. Do we have a second on that?
I'll
Support.
second that, Mr. Peterson.
Julie, did you get all that?
I did.
You did or didn't?
I did.
Okay, so
Yep.
could we have a roll call, please, then?
Sure,
This is
Mr.
for-
Dons? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm all set, Julie. I interrupted. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay,
Continue.
that's all right. So I got a yes from Mr. Dons. Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes,
Ms. Goodman.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the next item. I think you've touched on a few of these things already, Barry, but we'll go ahead and take them as they're listed under new business. And we'll move on to Appendix B, so we can go ahead and get approval for signing that. My review of it looks like it's requiring an extra, $76,000, Barry?
So the context of this is, as it related to the pavement resurfacing project, the FAA required that even though the project got delayed from last fall to this spring, and we still had to remark or repaint our runway markings last fall.
Correct,
And so we
Correct.
ended up doing them again in the spring. So this
correct.
is basically that extra cost being added into the overall project.
So I was trying to read through it, that's where I came up with the $76,000. Is that the extra cost?
Yes.
Okay, got it now. Sometimes it's kind of hard to read all these reports.
I
So,
had to sit down myself a few times and try to, okay, how does this one relate to this? And yes, it is.
Is the cost absorbed by the state?
We still have our 2.5% share,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I mean, it is federally funded.
mark in that it has a sponsor share, I presume that's us, and it's showing us, roughly $5,500 for our share
And
on
that's
this.
the entire project, not just the increment here, but yes.
Okay, yeah, right, that's the entire project. The entire project is, a little over $1.1 million. Okay. Well, let me go forward. Could I get a motion to go ahead and approve this, amendment for the extra $76,000 for restriping, repainting the runway project?
I'll make that motion. Mark Bergstrom.
And if I could
Okay,
request that, since this is going to be a document with the state that's going to need to be digitally signed, that you authorize me to digitally sign.
Add that in.
okay, we're adding in the fact to let Barry digitally sign this document for the state. Do I have a second on all this?
I'll second that, Mr. Peterson.
Okay, thank you. Julie, did you get all that?
I did. You ready for a roll call?
Yes, please.
All right. Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes,
Mr. Dunce,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes,
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Yes.
okay, moving on to Appendix C, which, the best I can put together goes back to Pre-Nuoff for their part in all this operation. That's also the extra engineering for repainting
Correct.
and
So,
so on of the runway. So we're talking, I think, $21,000 on this one, Barry?
so again, how
Okay.
it's put together is the one we just approved. That is basically amending the grant agreement or the funding for the project. This
Right,
actually the consulting work that was done. So of that 76,000 of funding, 21,000 of that went to Pre-Nuhoff for the engineering fees related to the project. And then the remaining went to the contractor, who was Reith Riley, for the actual work.
yeah, and if, and all in this also has to do with some of the extra signage we had to put together,
Yep, that was
correct, Barry? Right,
another FAA requirement that came in that got rolled into.
right, that's rolled into this. Okay, if there's no further discussion, I would like to have a motion to have this document, Appendix C, approved by Barry and probably electronically signed for it again, Barry?
This doesn't matter since this is between us and Pre-Nuhoff. They don't require digital signatures, but I can do that if.
Okay, so if somebody would make that motion along those lines, we'll go forward.
So moved.
So moved, okay. Do I hear a second?
Support.
Second. Okay. Julie, did you get that?
I did.
Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Miss Goodman. Miss Goodman,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes,
Mr. Dunce,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Suda.
Yes. Okay, moving on to Appendix D, and Appendix D is kind of the ones I like to do. As that is a modification, contract modification, but it has a negative value to it, so money is going back into the pot of $13,994. And this also comes back to, it looks like the extra materials they didn't actually consume, right, Barry, in the project on the runway?
Yep. So this is kind of the final accounting, looking at
Right,
versus planned quantities and basically.
right. This is a reduced quantity from what they planned, so there's a rebate on that. So, could I have a motion to approve this contract modification that has a negative value of almost $14,000 for the runway rehab of 10/28?
And this, since this is a MDOT document, it needs digital signature, so
Okay, and also included that with permission for Barry to do an electronic signature for approval.
so moved by Mr. Peterson.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Second.
Do I hear a
Gentile.
second? Okay. Julie, did you get that?
I got it.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Dunce,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Goodman, or Miss Goodman,
Yes.
Oh,
Mr. Haw,
yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes,
and Mr. Suda,
Yes.
and Mr. Gentili.
Yes.
Okay, moving on, we got another one. The last one is contract with, let's see, Preen Newhoff for the PFAS
yes.
work that we got approved the other day or last month to do. And the value of this contract is, if I'm reading it right, $20,000, Barry? Inside all the paperwork and so on, that's the portion that went to Preen Newhoff, if I was reading all this documentation correctly.
Off the top of my head, I don't know, because it's a long document.
Right, if you flip it all the way over to page 16, that's what I was going on, there's a couple of breakdowns, cost breakdowns. So I presume that's where this $21,000 is being generated from, or the $20,000.
Well, again, okay, so I'm seeing 237,300.
That's for the total contract, this is just for Preen Newhoff's portion, correct?
But they are the project lead.
Oh, okay, got it,
So
okay.
I believe this is for the entire project.
Okay, that makes sense.
Contract.
Yeah, out of all this, they get the $20,000 someplace or another. Is that correct, Barry?
That is my understanding.
Okay, that's what I'm pulling out too.
I thought it was much more than that.
Much more for their cost?
No, much more for the total contract value that's being.
Oh. No, I think that was about correct, 237,000, I think that's what it was.
Yeah, that's what I have up on the screen.
Right. Okay, could we have a motion? Go ahead.
The grant agreement that is funding this project, so.
Correct. Okay, could we have a motion, please, to approve, for Barry to approve and sign off on this contract for professional engineering service, what we're calling Appendix E?
Karen, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Do I hear a second for that?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Julie, get all that?
I got it.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Karen Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Dunce,
Yes.
and Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Okay. Wow, what a lot of stuff today. Barry, did we forget anything?
I don't think so.
I think we got most everything. If we forgot it, it wasn't that important then. So, in conclusion here, do we have any comments by board members, et cetera?
Yeah. How did I miss out on the airplane tour?
You were too late, I think.
I didn't know about it.
Well, there'll be plenty of times otherwise. You'll catch
I'm
another
sure
one
there
here.
will.
Yeah, we'll wait for the November one. That'll be grander.
I think I added it in the email that I sent out with the agenda and everything.
Hey,
Yes, you
Barry,
did.
this is Andrew. I emailed the transportation manager here to see if maybe him or somebody on his team that's not getting full week's hours right now might want a side job doing some of those things.
Okay.
I'll let you know if he responds.
And they can just contact Cape Air directly, because they're the ones that are looking for at least some of those things to contract out.
Okay.
Okay, is everybody set? I'm gonna close the meeting. Meeting is closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.